Welcome to the National Women's Fitness Academy podcast. We're here to talk about women's health, female hormones, body image, and all things health and fitness.
Hello, girls, and welcome back to another episode of the Women's Fitness Academy's podcast. I'm your host, Siggy, one of the WFA's educators and a women's body image and fitness coach. Today's podcast is going to be fucking epic, guys. And I know I say this every time, but I'm literally being joined by this wonderful human being, which we've actually never met, but we were literally talking offline going, it feels as if we've known each other already. Anywho, I'm chatting with Nadia Sophia, who is the founder of Mind and Core and is a mental health and performance coach. Now, Nadia is known for her amazing work by helping people who want to build high performance life through a balanced mind, quality, meaningful relationships, and clear communication, which FYI, I believe is so valuable to learn and anyone needs to do more of it. So before I continue rambling on, Nadia, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. Quite an intro.
Well, you're quite a woman, so you know what? Have to have those high expectations.
That's it. I shall try my best to live up to them in this next hour or so.
Hell yes. Hell yes. So for those who don't know you, Nadia, I would love for you to elaborate a little bit more about what got you into this mental health performance, side of coaching. Like, what's your journey around mental health?
Yeah, I think it definitely, I can't speak for everyone, but in my case particularly, it definitely was driven from my life. I think I landed here initially more trying to resolve my own stuff, and it became this experience of also being able to help other people. I think where does your mental health journey start? I think it starts long before most of us think. It starts before you're born. It starts with your parents, right? And the lives my parents lived before I was even in the picture. And then, the life that happened when my mum was pregnant and what happened after that. And I guess to give a bit of background on that, my mum got quite a severe mental illness. And when she was younger, I think she was about 16, 17, she got diagnosed with really severe bulimia and actually got put into a mental institution for 2 or 3 years with very little contact with her family after that point. So from then her mental illness sort of exacerbated, and you can kind of imagine the life and the things that came from there. And then my dad is from Afghanistan and grew up there in war, had to leave. His dad passed away when he was really young. He was the oldest of 8 siblings. He had several, I think both of my parents had a lot of experiences they hadn't resolved, a lot of relationships that didn't go well, and that was all what culminated in I guess the beginning of my life. Straight off the bat, my mum was really unwell, even when she was pregnant with me. From what I understand, she actually wanted to kill herself most of the time. So understanding that that's the environment that a body is growing in, you kind of get an idea of what a child starts to face before they even come into the world, and, my dad was always had some new business idea that he was trying to work, which creates a lot of pressure and stress on a relationship and a couple. And I think as soon as I was born, same thing, dad went back to work. Mum tried to go back into work a few days later, and I was separated from my parents pretty much straight away and kind of bounced between grandparents and them. And then Mum actually had a breakdown and was in hospital before I was 1 month old. So I think in terms of a lot of the things that I deal with now, they actually come from before I even could have fathomed anything, because children need to feel safe, they need to belong, they need to be loved. And without those 3 things, we start to morph and mold ourselves into whatever is going to hold on to that experience of feeling safe and feeling attached to loved ones. And I very immediately had so much detachment from the people in my life because of the relationship that my parents kind of had with themselves and with each other even then. And I think everything just kind of spiraled a little bit from there, the first 5-10 years of my life, I moved around a lot. I had a lot of different caregivers, which in that sense I was lucky, right? There was a lot of people that were willing to put a hand in, but it means as a child, all of a sudden I'm in a new environment. It's not explained. You don't know why. There's new rules. There's new ways that they love you. There's new ways that they support you. There's ways that they don't. And I think I learned at that age to start dishonoring myself in order to hold on to people. You know? And I learned that if I wanted to stay alive, because that's at the end of the day, as a baby, you are alive based on those caregivers paying attention to you, you know? So I learned how to change for whoever I was with. And I started to learn very early on that I like didn't belong. And I feel like that story is something that's like plagued my mental health journey a lot throughout my life, you know, and that feeling of I don't belong, people always leave, like what is it about me that keeps making these situations happen? I think it also is part of what has today led to me being the coach that I am, because I'm sure like a lot of your listeners have heard the term hypervigilance before, but I'll explain it again just in case they haven't. But it's essentially the process of becoming hyper aware of your environment and surroundings in order to protect yourself. So because of the fact that I got moved around a lot, because of the fact that my mum was quite mentally ill, so she actually wasn't able to be emotionally aware and connected of my needs, I, from a very young age, became super tapped into everyone else's needs, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of people have this, call themselves empaths. We feel what everyone else feels. We know what they need all the time. We can predict what they want. And I definitely got that wiring from a young age. I guess the curse that I turned into a blessing is the fact that I use that in my coaching and stuff now. And I found a way to direct it that I guess can help others, but it's been something that's made my journey like quite tough, because then, you know, you start to get into like high school and primary school and you start to make friends. And I learned that the thing that I have available is to predict everything that you need from me all the time. And if I give it to you all the time, if I give you my time, my money, my care, my whatever, that, oh, this is how I hold on to relationships. Like that's what I learned. And I tried to do that for a lot of my life, and not always with a whole lot of success. Like I think by the time I got to high school, I got bullied quite a lot as well. Like my dad was a really strict Middle Eastern guy. You know, I wasn't allowed to straighten my hair or wear makeup or wax my eyebrows, which was kind of horrific when you imagine that I'm half Afghan, half Italian. So I had I got bullied a lot physically. I also had scoliosis. So I had a big curvature in my spine and a hump on the back of my shoulder until like year 9. So I think at school they used to call me the Hunchback of Notre Dame, an ape girl. And like, yeah, got a lot of like bullying and like teasing and stuff at that age. Again, like enforcing this, I don't belong. It's because of the way that I look. It's because of my ethnicity. It's whatever. I just kept trying to look for the reasons why like people don't stay and people don't like me, you know? And for me, that even got, I guess, again, compiled at home. So my dad remarried when I was about 6 to a woman from overseas. And I guess in her defense, she came over here from a foreign country, no family, no nothing, and got planted with like a small child. And she was like my dad was quite a bit older, and our relationship just did not go well. Like I actually can't remember a lot of it when I was really young, but I have this memory of, they found a drawing that I'd done, like, and I would have had to have been like 10 or 11, and I'd drawn a picture of my stepmom, and then I'd put knives being stabbed into her. Like that was the picture I'd drawn. So like what was going on for me at 10, that was how I was feeling in my own home, you know? So kind of started in that place where at school I was getting bullied. At home, me and my stepmom really didn't get along. I didn't fit. Mum is having breakdowns every 2 years my whole life. And her breakdowns look like me getting a call that she's naked on a tram in the city at the moment and we have to call the team to try to pick her up. Or I have this one memory of like being young and I had a friend for a sleepover, and like her breakdowns would start kind of fun. She'd be fun. She'd be like, oh, like, let's go do something. Like, let's go to Crown. And we're like, okay, like, let's go to Crown. And we went to Crown at like 11 o'clock at night, and we were younger, and we were like, you know, we thought this was really cool. And then all of a sudden out of nowhere, she just starts like screaming at this man and like accusing him of like trying to like molest us or hurt us. And she's yelling, and me and my friend are like, we're young. I'm like 12 and I'm holding her back. Wow. And when you're in a panic episode, you have like strength. She's like fighting against us and trying to beat this man, and like, you know, I've got my friend there. I'm having to try to call my dad and get out of that situation, you know, like that's all the things that were going on for me during high school, as well as all the normal stuff. And by the time I was about 16, it kind of culminated in me being to a point that I wanted to kill myself. Like it really, just every part of my life had just gotten too hard and I didn't see a way out. I felt like I was failing everyone. Like I was making my dad's life miserable because my stepmom hated me. Like, oh, no matter what I did, I couldn't make my mum love me enough to stay on her medication. I didn't have a boyfriend. I used to get bullied because I wasn't hooking up with boys and stuff like that because I wasn't allowed. Like there was so many things about me that was just so different. And just the situation at home just got to a point where I just couldn't anymore. And I ran away from home when I was 16 and then started, I guess, the second half of another part of my journey after that. And it kind of just, I can go in detail after that, but it kind of goes on forever. But I guess it starts to paint you this picture of like what was happening inside me. And for me, this thing that came up is relationships was a big part of it, right? My parents' relationships with themselves, with each other, the relationships within my family that meant that I kept getting bounced around and people weren't communicating about it properly. The relationship my stepmom and my dad had and how that affected me. My relationships at school, relationships with boys, because that was a big thing that I'd get bullied about, in the fact that I hadn't really like hooked up or had boyfriends and stuff like other girls that I knew had. And I think that's where it started for me, where it was like, I need to understand people and I need to understand relationships and I need to figure out how to make this stop happening, because it just keeps happening and I just don't want to do this for the rest of my life. Like it's so exhausting. And the one thing I was always good at was talking. I had the nickname of Chatterbox even when I was younger. And I always kind of knew that I either wanted to become a lawyer or a psych. They were sort of the two things that floated around in my head, because like I said, that I had that empath, I want to help everyone thing, that it was part of my identity. And those two jobs seemed like the right way to go. And I ended up falling into psychology like when I finished school. And that, I guess, started the second part of my journey in terms of when the hurting started to become healing a little bit more. So during that course, I obviously started to learn some of the basic tenets of like mental health and sort of creating like peace of mind is one of the things I talk about in my 3 pillars, right? I started to learn like, okay, cool, if I learn about attachment theory, or I learn about this, or you meditate, or you breathe, or you're in nature, cool, these things give you a little bit more chill in your brain, and that gives you more ability to start functioning. And then I think the relationship piece took longer to like all the way click, because what started to happen at that point in my life was I started to build good relationships, but in a bad way. So I fell into partying, like again.
You did it. We all.
Yeah. So I think I was about 21 and I'd had another like breakdown at home happen and being kicked out again, and we're trying to work full time, trying to study full time, trying to pay the bills, falling into debt. And I just really got to this point where I was like, fuck this, that feeling of I'm going to try to please everyone. At about 21, I'd gotten to the point where every adult in my life had let me down, and I realized that I couldn't please them. No matter how hard I busted myself into a pretzel, I couldn't fucking do it. So I just went through a fuck this stage. And with that, there was partying, going out. But it's funny, in that container, I started to meet people and have these big communications and connections and share, and heaps of other people that have had like troubled things happen to them and fallen into that community. So all of a sudden I belong. I'm not the only person who's been through that stuff. You have people to see every weekend again and again and again who come back. You never have to be alone, right? You stay up all night, they're there, and you go home, like for a little while it felt like nothing else mattered and I got everything I needed. But obviously again, that hits this point and it stops being resourceful, and that happened for me again. But I think that's the first place I really noticed that relationships is where you do the big healing, because you can have we have this society that really talks about independence. Like hyper independence has actually become something that's so valued. But I think ultimately, like a big thing I learned throughout my journey is like being alone can only get you so far and can only heal so much. So as I saw the way that even unhealthy relationships helped me get a lot further along in my journey, and then I got to a point where I started to realize that they weren't working, but I probably had gotten sort of towards the end of my psych degree and I had a lot more of the basic tools. My general mental health was a lot better. I started doing and going to more of the right things like seminars and events. And then I started to maybe meet people that there was more alignment with. And that next step of the relationship piece really like started to fall into place, where again, I realized that, yeah, just those three things. Like if you learn how to communicate, like what you need and how you're feeling and set boundaries with other people, if you learn how to connect and feel safe in connection, which is so hard, but if you can do that with the right people, and you can create some level of peace of mind, they were the three, I mean, they're not magic because I did take work, but the three like magic pieces to like getting to the place that I am now, which is definitely not perfect, like I'm in a new relationship that is definitely the most healthy and the best relationship I've had so far. But in that, still challenges, right? Because you have that history of so many unsafe connections and so many relationships that ended badly, that trying to trust and stay open and communicate and keep your peace of mind while letting someone in is the ultimate challenge, And I hope I kind of answered your question, but I feel like I kind of pivoted and went round and round a little bit.
You did. And I love everything about it. Seriously. My mind was like going absolutely crazy as you were sharing your intake of your upbringing as well, because I can relate to this so easily, because I got brought up in a house where it was just chaos. Absolute chaos even from before I was born. So I'm really glad that you brought it up to make our listeners understand that, hey, it's not just once you're here on earth, it's literally when you're still in your mother's womb. And I always struggled to self-regulate myself because my environment was just so crazy. And I love the fact that you're so open about what your past was like and what the situations were like, because again, from your upbringing or from anyone who had a really difficult upbringing, for us to handle stress is really challenging, because we can't handle it as like your normal, Joe around the corner, because we cope by either shutting it completely down or, like you said, going to parties, getting fucked up and trying to figure out what is that pathway for us to actually navigate our emotions. And on the topic of relationships, I love the fact as well that you're in a healthy relationship, because there's nothing more valuable than experiencing that. And I experienced that not long ago. And it's also quite challenging because, like you said, from a history of having, negative or toxic or abusive relationships, I don't know about you, but I found myself falling in that self-sabotage behavior, because I was like, this is way too fucking good. Like, why are you so kind to me? Like, how is this working out? And then you fall into the trap of going, oh, well, I'm not good enough because back in high school, I got bullied and I got called names and this and that. So I love the fact that you've brought this up in terms of relationships. And I want us to dive a little bit deeper into that, because you're very big on talking about self-sabotage and why we do it. And I think this is a really good conversation to open up about it, especially around relationships.
Yeah. Well, like you said, you're a learning machine, like your nervous system, like who you are. It's just a learned experience of your past. And you're designed to keep seeking information that matches what you already know to be true. So when you have a long history of knowing that relationships are dangerous, people leave, people treat you like that you're not good enough, and that's why these things continue to happen, you're literally trying to go against all your natural programming to believe anything different. But in that is that test, and you mentioned a lot of good things there, right? It's us learning how to regulate our nervous systems and how to behave and choose different people in that. I think that's the biggest thing as well. It's choosing different people, because ultimately, like, if you keep choosing the same sort of people that have that same history, it's very likely you are going to keep creating the same pattern. And I think that's what's really uncomfortable, because very often in relationships, how often do you hear, oh, feels like I've known you forever. Feels like I've known you my whole life. But if you're someone that comes from a history of trauma, that could be the most dangerous thing you've ever heard, because that could be telling you that that person is meeting your love blueprint, right? Like, I think we learn what love is based on our first experiences of love. So if your first experiences of love are not one that you want to repeat, excuse me, there's something in the air, then what's one of the things I would say is be aware of that feeling of, oh, I've known you forever, you know, that immediate intense chemistry and connection that you have straight away. Like, approach that with a little bit more caution. I'm not saying walk away from it, because me and my current partner actually did have that straight away, but it caused for me to go a lot slower than I have in the past, because I know now that that is probably my nervous system feeling familiar. And for me, familiar is not ended very well in the past. So it's really like staggering and making sure you're getting to know the person for more than just like the feeling that they give you when you're around them or when you're having sex. You know, that's like one of the first things I say in this space. And it's kind of like, I always talk about 4 pillars of a relationship. So I say, cool, you have that feeling, that chemistry. For me, that is so important. I've tried to do the relationship without it because he was perfect in every other way, but it didn't work because I'm a spicy lady. I needed some spice, right? And we didn't have the spice, unfortunately. But the other things I always say to think about is, you know, are you also compatible from a lifestyle perspective? You know, on a day-to-day, do you want to eat the same foods, wake up and go to sleep at the same time, go to the same places? Do you both, you know, if he hates summer and all you want to do is be at the beach, that's going to be it seems silly, but that's going to be something you're going to disagree about every day forever, you know? There's the values piece, like, do you actually share the same values? Is respect mean the same thing to both of you? Does love mean the same thing to both of you? Do you both value family or freedom? Or, because again, all those things are going to come up. Do you want to travel? Don't they want to travel? Like, you need to make sure you're aligned in the values piece. And then long-term goals is the other one that I talk about. So same thing. Do you want to get married? Do you want to have kids? When? Where do you want to live? Like, do you want to build an empire? Do they want to be a gypsy? Because that's, again, very different stuff going on. And then chemistry is that final part. So make sure you're looking at all 4 facets when you're starting to get to know someone, and particularly when the chemistry is hot and you have a history of, you know, a traumatic history in terms of relationships. Really slow it down and like think about those other 3 pillars in depth before you let yourself get all the way in. So that's like literally saying to yourself, like, don't see them more than once a week at the start. Like, that's a rule I have for my like more anxiously attached clients, is in the beginning, just only see them once a week, at least for 4 or 5 weeks, because then they've had to show up consistently for 4 or 5 weeks before you've gotten to that place where you're spending 4 nights a week together, 5 nights a week together. You do that for 2 weeks. The chemistry's already whatever. You're in love with them, but you have no fucking idea who they are. And that is the beginning of disaster waiting to happen, you know?
I love the fact that you've brought this up in terms of the anxious style, and also in fact of the 4 pillars, because I find usually women tend to fall for the chemistry way too fast, whether they're anxious or not. And then they completely not forget, but they kind of like put the others on the side. They're like, oh, you know, as you said, like, he doesn't like summer, but I do, but we'll make it work. Or a big one for me is health. If my partner does not take care of his health, it's a big red flag. Like, I'm into fitness, into health, whether it's mindset, nutrition, whatever. If there's no value around that, it's just like, how are you going to make it work? You can't change someone to do what you're wanting. So that's already going to be like a massive, you know, game changer. And in terms of the anxious type, now I know I have some anxious styles within me. However, my question to you is, are we anxious or are we attracting emotionally unavailable partners?
It could be both, right? So I think it's hard because you probably don't know 100% if you're anxiously attached until you're with someone who's really secure. Because if you're finding that even in a secure environment, you are anxious, then there is 100% confirmation that there's anxious attachment.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying in the sense of sometimes it's like, I'm anxious, but maybe I have good reason to be, because this guy is inconsistent and he's unavailable and he won't commit. And that is causing me to feel anxious. And I like to talk about this differentiation a lot, because so many women go, oh, I'm just anxiously attached, and then excuse his behavior. It's like, oh, I'm being anxious. But ask yourself, is there a reasonable reason to be feeling anxious right now? You know, because I've been with this guy for 6 months, but he doesn't want to call me his girlfriend. And his only reason why is that he's had poor relationships in the past. He also haven't met his friends and he doesn't put me on his social media and whatever. To me, I understand why you're feeling anxious, because there are signs that tell you there is inconsistency in this person's behavior. And I really encourage women that are listening to this, don't discount what you feel. Like, I understand that when we have a history that is been difficult, that we are more sensitive, or our feelings can be bigger than maybe they should be, but don't let that totally disregard your intuition. And I think this is where, like, potentially, whether it's having a coach or having like friends that you trust their judgment and you know that they're not involved personally, right? So they're able to be a bit more level. Sometimes it's turning to those people and say, this situation, do you think that this is reasonable how I'm feeling? Or do you think I'm overreacting? And having someone that can actually say to you, no, that is a reasonable reason to feel anxious. Therefore, well, you need to take action. They either need to change or you need to leave, versus, no, this guy is being perfect and you are still feeling anxious because of your stuff. Then that's a different course of action.
You made a really good point in terms of them not introducing you to like their mates, but also social media. And I've had this conversation with with a couple of friends, and it's interesting when you have these conversations, because some of them could not give a flying fuck of them sharing their relationship on social media. But then on the other spectrum, there's women who are like, well, if he doesn't show me on social media, he has all these women that follow him, so he wants to be approached as if he's still single. Like, what's your intake on that?
I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all approach, and I don't think that social media alone should dictate your concern. Yeah, if he's committed to you in every other way, you've met his family, you've met his friends, you're in a committed relationship, you have no other reasons to distrust this person, but he's private, or he doesn't use his social media much, and you're not on there, then I think that you need to check yourself in terms of like, is this really a worthy thing to get into an argument about, but I think it is a matter of like, if that's part of a bigger piece and there's a sequence of information that's starting to make you feel a bit uncomfortable about a person, and you've also had a conversation with him to say, hey, like, I know maybe this doesn't really matter to you, but this is what it means to me. For you, even just one post of me on your social media, it makes me feel like you're proud of me, that you're committed to our relationship, that there's no part of you that's trying to like hide me, because maybe I've had that come up for me in the past and I'm feeling a bit insecure about it. Would you be open to doing that? And it's kind of that thing of, well, it's not really about the social media there. It's about the fact that you've expressed it's really important to you, and like, what is it costing him to do that thing, So I don't like to give a blanket rule in this space, and I don't like to say, yeah, like crack the shits if he doesn't, or be fine 100% if he does, but we put too much weight on it sometimes as well. I think you need to look at it in a picture of things. And if you are getting multiple signs that a man is non-committal or potentially has a history of not being faithful, I do understand why there's some merit in that, especially if it's just like expressing that something's important to you. Like, for example, in my relationship, my partner is not great with the time, right? He just loves to chat, and he just chatting and whatever. And when he rocks up somewhere, he rocks up and he's late. It doesn't bother him. I hate people being late. It makes me feel personally disrespected, and it just absolutely turns me. And there was one time that he was very late and I was very, very angry, right? But we hadn't really spoken about it before that time. So he came over and I was upset. I think I cried. It was like quite traumatic. I just had a lot of feelings about it. But in the end, like, I expressed to him, this really bothers me. Like, this is what being on time means to me, and this is how it felt when you didn't come. And in the future, either tell me, hey, I cannot commit to a time, and if you do, be on time. Now, since then, he does that. And if he was to not do it in the future and not communicate with me about it, it becomes more about the fact that, well, I've now expressed to you that that is an important value to me. So though we might not be aligned in that place, which goes back to the conversation we've had earlier, we have now made a deal based on what works for both of us, which means sometimes I say, well, whenever you can get here, no time commitment, because that allows for him to be him. But when I say be on time, he will be, because he knows how important it is to me. And that's where we made a deal. So going back to that 4 pillars, and something I talk about in healthy relationships is, it's okay to be misaligned in those 4 things, but you have to understand that anywhere you have a misalignment, you then have to come up with a deal that works for both parties. And if it doesn't, someone is going to be perpetually pissed off for the rest of your relationship. So that's where those misalignments, like, you got to think, like the social media thing. If you meet a guy and he says from the beginning, nah, not into it, not going to post, and you know that for you, that is never going to stop bothering you, well, then either you need to do work to get over that, or you need to not choose that guy, because he's been upfront about it from the beginning, that that's how he feels about it. He might have his reasons. I like to be private. Other people get involved. It's my business page. Whatever the reasons are, you need to understand whether you can get on the same page. And something I say when I coach couples, which I feel like sometimes they're a bit like, did you just say that? I go, well, this is what they want. This is what you want. Come up with a deal or break up. Because otherwise, or just have this fight every day for the rest of your life. I don't care. It's your life, not mine. But they're your options at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's so true. And resentment just doesn't go a long way. Like, after a while, you literally just end up breaking up. But you made such a good point, because it's either up to you to do the work, or literally, if it's a deal breaker, then you call quits, you know. But when it comes, you mentioned a really good point about us as individuals. If that's what irritates us, or we feel insecure about it, what is something, it's a little bit of a loaded question, but obviously everyone's going to experience some form of insecurity for a million reasons.
Yeah.
But let's say in terms of like the social media side of things, if someone is so insecure around that and your partner's like, bitch, fucking get over it, or like, we're done, like, what are some steps that you would help that individual to overcome that insecurity?
Yeah. So I think you first need to identify like where that insecurity originated. So like there's experiences in your past that have led for you to believe that you need to be insecure about this topic, right? Like we said, you're a learning machine. That's something you learned. So part 1 is go and deal with where that started. So go and do the work, whether that's journaling, meditating, breath work, working with a coach, working with a psychologist, doing tapping, hypnosis, cold water therapy, any of those things. But you need to go back and address the root of the problem. You need to go back there and you need to unpack that. Once that's been unpacked, you kind of also then need to understand like what else is that tied into. So is that a self-worth thing? You know, is it that, well, I don't think I'm pretty enough, or that I'm good enough, or that I'm too much, or whatever, and people leave because of those things? If you know what it is you're specifically insecure about, then that's the other place where you need to work. So we actually had a webinar earlier in this week where I gave my favorite tip for self-worth. So one of the favorite things that I do, it's a really basic tool with self-worth, is every day write down 3 things you acknowledge yourself for, or proud of yourself for, or give yourself a compliment. So I felt my skin looked really beautiful today. I'm proud of myself for getting through my day, or like letting myself off the hook because I didn't do all the things I needed to, but I was tired. Whatever it is, it's literally tapping into the same science that they talk about with gratitude, where they say, you know, look at 3 things you're grateful for every day, and your brain begins to learn how to search for that information throughout the day. We're just editing that a little bit to be specific to your mind learning to look for good things about you, because that's obviously what's lacking there with the self-worth. And target it, yeah? If you know for you it's physical, then really give yourself 3 physical compliments every day. Write down compliments other people have given you. Like, that's a big thing. I think especially earlier in your journey, I found seeing myself out of other people's eyes often was better than seeing myself out of my own eyes. So if someone gives you a compliment or says a nice thing, write down the person's name and what they said and why they said it. And then read that list back again and again and again. Start reinforcing your mind's ability to see the good in you and how you are worthy and how you are beautiful, and practice that as much as you've practiced not feeling good about yourself. I think in the container of relationships, the big piece here is communication, right? So it's understanding how you're feeling and what's coming up, and talking to your partner about it in a way that's not necessarily accusatory, because in that process of talking it through and them holding space, you'll start to regain trust and healing. Because the same way that you learned to be this way because of an ex that did certain things, with a new partner, you have an opportunity to learn to be a different way. So I can actually give you an example from a previous relationship I had. So he never really liked my content on social media, but his ex popped up in my newsfeed and I'd noticed that he'd liked her photos. And I spiraled, right? And I wasn't going to say anything to him about it because I was like, you look crazy. Like, can't say anything, but it's fucking doing me. And then we were together and I was like, no, you know what? I'm going to raise it with him. And I said, hey, babe, can I talk to you about something? He's like, yeah. I said, I'm not saying that this is the truth, but I'm saying this is how I'm feeling and how something's come across to me. It's like, I've noticed that when I post on socials and stuff, you haven't really liked my content, right? Which is all right, but probably has occurred to me sometimes. I'm like, oh, like he didn't like my photo. He's online. Like, that's weird, but let it go. But also recently, like, your ex popped up in my feed and I did notice that you've liked quite a few of her photos and it's making me feel a bit funny and I'm like, not sure what that's about. And it's not like I said, you know, notice how I didn't accuse him. I didn't say, why are you liking your ex's photos and not mine? You're obviously still into her. They were things I was maybe thinking, but I kind of just opened it to the ground. He goes, oh, fuck. He goes, honestly, you don't really pop up in my feed. Like, she pops up and I like it. You know, we're on good terms, but your stuff just hasn't popped up. Like, if I know, now that I know it bothers you, like, he goes, I'll do it right now. And he went on my page and like liked a bunch of photos. And then after that, the algorithm probably started liking us more and I popped up in his feed, right? So when I had that conversation and he explained it, I was like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. Like, now I'll see. And then next time he did like my photo. And in that process, I then started to feel a little bit better, right? So it's that whole thing of when that thing comes up, bring it up with them, but in a way to say, you know my history, you know my past, which hopefully they do because I highly recommend that.
Yes.
I know maybe isn't about us, but this is how I'm feeling at the moment. Like, can you let me know why you did this, or can you be aware of this in the future? And a healthy relationship and a good partner will be able to say, that's definitely not what it's about, but if that's how you're feeling, okay, like I'll make an effort with that stuff. But it's very much this process of like both of you being able to give a little, and then through that really healthy communication and the repetition of that again and again, you'll find that you continue to like get less and less self-conscious about those things. Whereas I feel like a lot of girls will bottle it up and hide it because they feel like they're being crazy or they don't know. And what happens is it bottles up, and you blow up on him anyway. But by then it's an accusation, you're attacking him, and then he's like, fuck you, I don't want to do that. Like, you're not being reasonable, and it becomes like so much bigger than it needs to be. So I think with that insecurity piece, it's one, have you dealt with where it started? What are you doing right now to build your self-worth? So I gave you one exercise, or also just like show up for yourself, right? Like, say you're going to do something, do it, builds your self-worth. Say you're going to do something, do it, builds your self-worth in any parts of your life. And then the other part is that open communication with either your friends or your partner, as long as they're capable of like handling it in the right way. So again, being careful if you have that friend that's like, fuck yeah, he's doing the wrong thing, girl, fucking let's go through his messages because he's probably, don't go to that friend.
No.
Know the people you can talk to that are able to like even say when you're wrong, and make sure that that's the person you're talking to that stuff about, as opposed to going to the friend that maybe like fans the flame.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes. Yeah. I feel as if we all have that one friend who just like wants to push that spiciness out of you. But, like you said, you have to be clear with your communication without having a go at them. And I think that's the most, I think it's one of the most probably valuable things to learn as an individual, not just in relationships. Well, I guess, yeah, in partnerships, but also like everyday life, like us talking right now, or like meeting people out in the street, like having a better understanding of how to communicate better.
Yeah. Well, for even business and stuff, like at work, whatever your relationship, you need to learn how to express how you feel and how something is affecting you without blaming it on the other person, because that's, you are making me feel like. is very different to after this situation happened, I noticed myself feeling like this. It may not have been your intention, but this is what came up for me, you know? And I think you need to bring someone's ego or defense down before they're able to heal a lot of things. So saying something like, you know, I'm sure that, like, I'm not saying this was your intention or this was just my interpretation. Immediately, it's not like they have to stand up for themselves. But the second that you say, you made me feel, or when you did, automatically, of course, you go, hang on, when I did what? You know, like up straight away. Whereas, like, when they've disarmed you by saying, I'm not saying at all that this was your intention, but this is how, oh, okay, you know that this is a you thing. Okay, I can listen if it's a you thing, you know? People are so much more responsive like that. And I think that is probably one of the biggest things I see break down communication. When I say relationships, I don't just mean intimate relationships. I mean business relationships. I just think in intimate relationships is the hardest place because emotions are the most charged. The most, like, more of your shit is present because you're letting them in a deeper, more intimate way. And it's a scarier attachment to lose. Mm-hmm. So in that setting, your past and your ego and your inner child is a lot more activated than in a situation where I'm not emotionally involved, right? Like, it's that whole, I can give you advice and my advice to you is great because I have no emotional attachment to it. Whereas when it's happening to me, I have all that emotional attachment, which makes it harder for me to own my part, which is what's necessary for the communication to actually take off. So if you honestly learned like one thing, it would be how to not attack when you're sharing things that you're feeling, and vice versa. Like, if you're the listener, not feeling attacked when that happens, because certain people can have so much going on that doesn't matter. You know, we all know that person is like, you can't say anything to them because anything you say to them is an attack, you know? And for that person, again, it's like, there's a prompt that I used a lot in my healing process, which was, well, if this wasn't about me, what would it be about? Because that's that idea of like when someone does something, yeah, like they're yelling at me or whatever, I'm like you go, what did I do? And then I go, okay, if this wasn't about me, what was it about? And then I remember that, you know, in this example, like, oh, my partner, that's how their family spoke at home. They always yelled. That was the only way he's ever learned to be heard. He's, you know, grown a temper because that's how he like protected himself in this world. And that's what's going on for him right now. So it doesn't make it okay. It doesn't mean I have to accept it, but it means I'm able to actually stay calm in that moment and go, this isn't about me. I can now get on his level, and then later I can say, hey, that wasn't on. Like, I understand that there was a lot going on for you. We've calmed it down, but you can't speak to me like that again, you know? And sometimes it's about being able to hold the thing you need to talk about until the person's come out of being triggered, because that's when you'll actually get a resolution. Like, you can yell at them while they're triggered if you just like fighting. Like, go for it. That's fine. Keep yelling. You know, just see how long the whole conversation goes. But if you actually want the communication outcome to be positive, then it's in your best interest to sometimes like take a breath and come to it a bit later.
Yeah. Oh my God. So many valuable things there. I swear. I think our listeners are going to be like taking notes as you're writing down, or I hope they all replay this episode because there have been so many golden nuggets around communication, relationships, and just for us as humans, just to literally what you do is just balancing our minds and having more meaningful meanings around ourselves and relationships. And you know what? With that being said, I know with your services, you offer a lot of one-on-one coaching. So yeah, would you mind sharing that with our audience and let them know how they can find you and work with you?
Yeah, so I'm actually going through a bit of a rebrand at the moment. So my Instagram is Nadia Sophia Coaching. At the moment, my website is www.mindandcore.com, but it will be changing to www.nadiasophiacoaching.com. So as you mentioned, I do work a lot one-on-one. So that's both with individuals and with couples. And I kind of work both in the mental health and mental performance space. So I do more that mental health stuff. Like, you know, you heard a bit about my life story and what's come up. So I do work a lot in that, you know, unpacking your history and making sense of it and tools to kind of find peace of mind and be able to communicate and be able to connect, knowing your story and integrating your story. And then I also do a bit more of the performance stuff. So I worked in HR for 5 years as well. So I kind of bring the coaching, psych, and the HR stuff together to kind of just like, even if nothing's wrong, right? Everything's right. Well, people will come see me and we do a bit of audit and we see what can be better and the goal setting and the values and bringing in more meditation and breath work and just like life hacking in that sense. And then I also run a community in South Melbourne called Cold and Conscious, where we do ice baths, there's connection, there's meditation, there's breath work. So that's on Saturday mornings. And I do also do like group events. So group meditation and breath work events for men and for women. Kind of I do two separates where we're in that container and we do a lot of that like masculine healing, feminine healing, which then allows you to go out and have those healthy relationships outside of that space. And later in the year, I actually will be bringing out like a group container as well. So kind of going into more of that group space. Again, all around the tenets that I've spoken about today, like what I believe you need to do to create peace of mind, what I believe will make you a good communicator, and what I believe will help you build and nourish like those healthy relationships, which like, as we spoke about, it's going to affect you. It's going to affect your kids. It's going to affect your grandkids. It's going to affect the whole world. So if you don't want to do it for yourself, do it for those other people. If you don't want to do it for other people, do it for yourself. And, you know, whether it's with me or with Sig or with anyone, like just, I hope there is something in this that made someone go, you know what, like this is worth talking to someone about.
100%. I love everything about that. So guys, make sure that you follow Nadia, reach out to her. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please make sure that you screenshot it, tag us at the Women's Fitness Academy, tag Nadia, tag myself. And then till next time, guys, let's start being a little bit more meaningful about how we speak and being clear with your communication.
That's it. Thanks for having me. Bye, guys.